Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 146 of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. In this episode, we are going to start talking about and working on dope of a rifle. And it's going to be a couple series in here. We might even do an online tutorial that we'll post up on YouTube about some of the things that we'll fix and adjust. But if you want to be a great shooter, you can be the best trigger puller on the planet and miss a lot of targets at distance if you do not know how to fix and the errors and problems that happen with the dope of a rifle. So this is really important and a big one. Thank you so much for joining us. But without further ado, here we go. So first off, we'd like to thank a couple of our sponsors. First sponsor we'd like to thank is TriggerTech. TriggerTech is the maker of fine rifle triggers. They make them for lots of different makes and models, single stage, two stage, different shoes, which is actually really nice. Straight trigger shoes, curved trigger shoes. So if you want to upgrade your rifle, a great way to do that is put a good quality trigger in it, and we believe that's TriggerTech. We put it in all of our custom rifles here. We offer them for sale for customers here, and we have never had one come back in need of repair. So easy to install, easy to adjust, and user-friendly. Stop over to triggertech.com. That's triggertech.com today. We'd also like to thank MDT. MDT is a proud maker of fine chassis. They make them in everything from the new HNT 26, the JAE 700, ACC, and ACC Elite, as well as a new one called a Timber. So one of the great parts about the area that we live in now is there's lots of great chassis to choose from, and a lot of them fit people differently. One of the reasons why we have the stock wall here is for customers to come in and try and get their hands on some of these to see and feel the difference. That makes a big difference when you're spending $300 to $2,000 on a chassis for your rifle. So if you want to upgrade your rifle, we really recommend stopping over to mdttac.com, and it's mdttac.com today. All right, so today I have with me again Richard. He decided to join us in on this podcast. Of course, I threw him under the bus this morning talking a little bit about, hey, we're going to talk about dope of a rifle. So good morning, Richard.
I think that's so funny, Jamie, that you make it sound like I have a choice.
There we go.
You'll be joining me for a podcast this morning, Richard, won't you? Sure, Jamie.
Yeah.
No, I do have a choice, but it's always fun.
We're getting into the shooting season, and one of the things that we spend a lot of time on, and one of the areas that we talk about with shooting is, and we're we just did a video on our logbook, so we had been asked over and over again for an instructional video, and we think logbooks are pretty self-explanatory. We're posting up an instructional video for the logbook, be up on YouTube later today or tomorrow. But in doing that, people ask, why is it so important to have a logbook, and why you should be keeping a logbook? And there's all of these things that people take for granted, and they don't really know what's going on in the background and why the logbook is so important. And a lot of it has to do with getting really good and true dope for your rifle. At the shooting school here, when we start talking about, shooting at distance, we live in an era where we believe that everything that we download and put on our phone with all these apps and ballistics charts, that this is the gospel truth, that you can type in all these numbers it's asking for, and you hit enter, and it calculates out the exact formula for your rifle to shoot 1,000 yards that day. And the truth of the matter is that is not true. It is not true. It is not true. And mathematically speaking, it is impossible. And one of the things that you'll learn early on, and something that will drive new shooters crazy. So if you want a surefire way to not enjoy yourself shooting at distance and enjoying the art of long-range shooting, is to go out and shoot like crazy and miss a whole pile of stuff. And it's not because you can't shoot. It's your dope is messed up. And this is a subject that here at the shooting school, and we'll be diving into it more, on the online school here later this summer, is your rifle barrel has a fingerprint to it, and it's in multiple areas that it has an effect on your dope of your rifle. And there's no way for these apps to know what that fingerprint is. Your rifle barrel is as unique as your fingerprint. Just like, you take twins that are born, right? You have a set of twins that are born, identical twins. But the truth of the matter is, their fingerprints are different. And so is your rifle barrels. You can take 6 Krieger barrels, and you can line them up. But the fingerprint on that bullet the changes that it makes, the curvature of the bore, the index of the curvature of the bore, all of that has an effect on your dope. And it's not negative and it's not positive. It's just an effect. And you have to know how to true that up and get it in line with what you need for your rifle and get true working dope for your rifle. Now, this is going to be several podcasts. This isn't something we're just going to cover in 30 minutes and it's going to be like, yep, there we go. Problem solved. We're good to go. But it's so important because I will be honest with you. There are matches that I've won and placed in that I was not the better shooter at that match. That is the absolute truth. There are matches that I've probably won and placed in or placed in the top 10 in that I only got in those positions because I had better working dope for my rifle. Most misses in skilled shooters' hands are always assumed to be in the wind. I'm going to say a lot of misses are just over the target and just under the target, or just as many misses that kept you out of those top spots. And we corrected in a couple different areas. So if you think about, and I'm going to have Richard chime here in a minute, but if you think about going back to working on just getting your rifle set up, right, we pay super attention to standard deviation. Why? Well, if your standard deviation is off ever so slightly, you miss the target high or low, right? We pay really close attention to all the things in reloading for that reason, is we want consistency, right? We want consistency and speed. But think about the standard deviation of the ballistic coefficient of the bullet. In early years of shooting in matches, I shot AMAXs. And I shot a 308, and I got a lot of funny looks shooting a 155 AMAX out of a 308 at a match. Guys would be looking at you like, what the hell are you shooting varmint bullets here? You know, and because the going was 168 or 175 Federal Gold Medal match and all these bullets. What I didn't tell them was, I was shooting 155s because I get the speed of the bullet for the 308 up in an area where it should be. So in those bullets, we were running just under 3,000 feet per second. But I shot the AMAXs not because they were just great varmint bullets, but because the ballistic coefficient from bullet to bullet was more consistent. So early on in my shooting career, I flipped some burgers over, and I'm not saying this is how they are now. I'm saying this is 20 years ago. This is an impression that it left on me 25 years ago or 20 years ago. Flipped the burgers over, looked at the hollow points, and all the sizes of the hollow points were different. And you know that has an effect on your ballistic coefficient. So every shot that you shoot, if the hollow points aren't the same exact size, you're going to have a slight variance in BC, just like you would have a slight variance in speed. And that equates to shooting high or low. And so I flattened my trajectory out, shooting a nice speed for a 308. I shot an AMAX. Now you've got A-tips and, of course, ELD match tipped bullets. And I did that to get my BCs under control from bullet to bullet. And some guys would take the bullets and they would tip them. So you could tip your bullets. There's a cutter that you can use to actually form the tips the exact same from bullet to bullet. Again, this is a bench rest technique that gets the BC consistency up between the bullets. It gets them all exactly the same. But in my mind, I'm already doing enough in the reloading and shooting, and I am not sitting there tipping bullets one at a time. And then you're removing material, which in my mind, again, now you're removing weight, which is part of the equation of ballistic coefficient. So you can see the rabbit holes that you go down, right? And all this work that we do to really get, good, consistent trajectory of our bullets. And that way we can map it out. But there's a hidden thing in here. And this is why some of the apps we don't use. This is why we sort of get in trouble sometimes, because the industry sort of ignores this, right? They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to do anything about it. And in my mind, it just messes with the shooter so bad, right? Is the curvature of the bore is one, and then the changing of the barrel to the bullet, So let's talk about the first thing. For you that are new to shooters or that have been around a long time, one thing that you'll never hear a conversation about is the curvature of the rifle bore, not the outside of the barrel, the inside. Yes. If you take and drill a long enough hole through any material, the tendency of the drill to walk or move happens. And it creates, because you can't drill a perfectly straight hole, it creates a thing called curvature to the bore. And so the rifling inside your rifle barrel is actually bowed a little bit. And what happens is, like, if you were to take your rifle barrel from the outside and you turn it, it looks like the barrel's perfectly straight and true. But inside, if you could cut that barrel completely in half, you would see that it's got a curve to it. The rifling does itself. So if you spun the barrel, it'd look like a jump rope. This has a huge effect for getting good working dope for your rifle. And the reason being is when that barrel locks up on your rifle action, right, it's going to index. So where it stops, it stops. That barrel is going to point in the up, down, left, or right position. That muzzle is going to index pointing anywhere other than perfectly straight in reference to the center of the receiver. So even though all these ballistic calculators out there mathematically are using these great numbers, and, you know, I heard people say that, you know, you use our system, we'll have you within 0.2 of a mile on, you know, first round hits. And I'm like, they're absolutely full of shit. If they're not taking into effect the curvature of the bore and the signature of the BC and all these other things that happen, they are selling you a load. One of the most popular ballistics apps out there, and I'm not going to say the name of it, that is just shoved on shooters, right? They know this problem exists. They don't give you the tools to fix it, which this podcast we're going to do, right? We're going to try to give you some tools to fix your dope. Their get-out-of-jail-free card for this is, well, in order for the app to run correctly, because we had a really smart gentleman from Ohio, I mean, super bright, OCD, ADD, almost a Richard level, I would say. Not quite there. But he was obsessed with this ballistics app. By the way, the most popular app that's used right now in long-range shooting. He's like, I don't understand why it's off. It's not right. You know, at 1,000, 1,200 yards, it's still off, a little high and low. And he's trying to do all these things that they're telling him to do to fix it. So they give you this thing. And the one error that I think right out of the gate is they tell you to adjust the speed of the bullet. Well, the speed of the bullet is the only thing that we actually know is probably right. We don't know the curvature of the bore. We certainly don't know if that bullet's being deformed in the barrel, changing the ballistic coefficient. And we're going to come back to that. So this guy was calling and calling. He's that customer that's just going to be just harassing the shit out of you because you're not giving him the answers he needs, right? So finally, he called him up and he said, look, what is going on? I've done everything you've asked me to do, but at distance, my dope is still off. And they're like, well, you know, the last step you really need to do is you need to set a target up where your bullet is transitioning to transonic, and you need to shoot a target at that distance, and then that will true your dope. And I was like, what a crocker. Like, who on God's green earth knows at what distance your bullet is actually going transonic? And that's the bullet going from supersonic to subsonic, right? That's a small window.
It's a tiny window. It's a tiny window.
Yeah, and not only that, but who has a 1,600-yard range to do it? Or the 35-foot piece of paper you're going to put up to shoot a group. And what about the wind?
Yeah.
What about all the other things that are going to move you left, right, up, and down? So what they do is they set the bar at such an unrealistic thing that they know you can't do that it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's not our fault. You just can't. You haven't set it up to the last thing that you really need to do to get good working dope for your rifle. This is what they told him. And, you know, he called me up and he was like, I don't get it. And I'm like, that is a get-out-of-jail-free card because there's no customers that are going to be able to go out and actually, you're setting the bar at something that 99.9% of the obsessed shooters out there couldn't do. Would you agree, Richard?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just the complexity of everything that's going on there. Yeah, that's an impossible task.
It is. And
for us mere mortals.
And even me and Richard, if I was to say, Richard, hey, we're going to go out and set a target up and try to get our impacts at the transonic. First of all, the math involved in that, all the humidity, the environmentals.
Well, I mean, it changed. I mean, the transonic estimation of the yardage is going to change with the environmental conditions every day, every portion of the day. So, you know, one day it would be at 1,200 yards, the next day it'll be at 1,275.
Yeah.
Where are you going to put your target?
Yeah. And so when people, I am so passionate about shooting and hitting stuff. Like, this is what I love to do. So when I hear people throw shit out there like this, and they're setting it up to almost blame the customer that, well, you're just not using our app right. So I'm going to come back to this, but I want to go one step further. We got harassed because we don't sell the wind meters with the ballistics apps in them, forward off or otherwise. And although I think it's a good backup, it's just really a cumbersome interface, right? Not that it doesn't work, but so they had said, well, we don't understand why you won't sell the $585 wind meter. It's more profitable to you, and you should be selling this to your customers. And I'm like, well, I don't use it. And they're like, why not? And I'm like, because it's not right. And she goes, what the hell do you mean it's not right? And I'm like, what are you doing with the curvature of the bore? How can we adjust for the curvature of the bore? And she goes, what's that? And I'm like, you need to call the people that wrote the program and ask them the same question. And if their response is, what's that? Then you got your answer.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, I want you to call me back and tell me what their reply to that question was. Mm-hmm. What are you doing with the curvature of the bore? And she never called me back. And she doesn't harass me about selling the wind meter with the ballistics app in it anymore. So, Richard, what has been, I'm sorry I'm going on a rant on this, but I had spent a couple of days on the phone working with customers. It's springtime, so everybody's getting out and getting after it.
Yep, thank goodness.
We talk about this in the class and actually show some pictures of people in manufacturing that are bending barrels to bend the bore straight, not the outside. Mm-hmm. Of course, creates a ton of stress in the barrel. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens when you start doing things like that. But I spent a lot of time, and it's one of the most frustrating things is to have customers missing high and low. Because at that point, they've done everything. They're pulling the trigger right. They've got their wind right. They're now shooting over and under the target, and it's not always their fault. At that point, it's just dope of the rifle.
Well, there's a tolerance stack up there, right? That starts with the shooter and how you're addressing the rifle. And then it goes into the rounds that you've either purchased or manufactured. And then it goes into how effective your trigger is and how it actually releases and the lock time. And it goes into, how many hamburgers you had last night and whether you weigh 200 pounds or 80 pounds wet. And then it goes into, do you have there's just so many variables in this whole thing, right? So the fact that we as shooters can reliably hit targets at 1,000 yards always astounds me, and I love it, right? Because I always tell people, look, anybody, if you could put a good rifle in front of somebody who's even never shot before, out to 500 yards, you can train that in quite literally, a short amount of time. Within a day, someone can reliably hit targets out to, 500 yards. And if someone's there calling the wind for them, they can definitely do it. Once you get beyond 500 and go to 700 yards, then the consistency starts to play a larger factor. Once you get beyond 700 yards, there's so many pieces of tolerance that stack up to work against you. It doesn't ever surprise me when I'm just right, just left, just over, just below the plate or whatever I'm shooting at. I don't get surprised by that. Then the skill then comes down to the motor skill of get the next round in the chamber and get the next round downrange under the best conditions that you can do that. Right? And that's the Richard opinion on this whole thing. I never get shocked if I just miss. If I have a big miss, I'm shocked, disappointed, disgruntled, and then I have a quiet session with Jamie about what I did wrong. But I'm disappointed if I have a wild miss. There's normally some driver error there. It's me. I did something funky. You know what I mean? But if it's just a slight miss, literally inches, I don't get upset about that. I'm not a person that worries about what happened, 10, 15 minutes ago. I just get on with the next thing, right? And so I'd like to say I hit every target I shoot at, but I absolutely do not. And we keep logbooks here. We're talking about logbooks, right? We keep logbooks on our test rifles, and there's a few pages in there where I write notes where Richard's really, really rusty, couldn't hit a broadside of a barn today, and I legitimately write that in there because if you I'm kind of digressing here a little bit, sorry about that, but if you look at your logbook before you go shoot, and the last time that you shot or the last couple of times you shot, you had a pretty poor showing, it gives you something to think about, right? You go, okay, I got to try harder today. I got to make sure maybe I've got a piece of paper I can review my fundamentals and just make sure that I'm, fundamentally sound before I get down before the rifle and before I start dry firing. I can just do a little practice of, does this really feel so on and so forth, right? It's all improvement and it's leading up to the perfect shot, which is what we're always looking for.
Mm-hmm. But how would you feel if there was something running in the background that was causing you to constantly feel that your dope isn't right at distance, and you don't know what it is? Like every time you go to the range, you're a little high, you're a little low, you're over the top, you're underneath. That really puts people in a bad way. Like they feel like they should have it figured out. They're not sure what's going on. They're not sure how to fix it because, again, nobody talks about how to actually fix your dope in the field. I think the Ford-Off program's got some really good tools in there that's getting really good. And they've given you a way to fix the curvature of the arc of the bullet. But, again, there's a little bit more to it. They make it seem like you buy a rifle, you zero it, you chronograph, you punch these numbers in, you print this chart out, and you should be able to go out and shoot anything at 700 and 1,000 yards.
You can if it's a big target.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
That's what it comes down to. You can if it's a big target.
Yeah.
Right? So I honestly haven't had that experience for many, many years, right? So when I got back into rifle shooting, there was a time where, I only had access to a 300-yard range unless we were at a competition somewhere. And so I did experience that, right? You've got what you believe to be a decent dope chart for the rifle out to 300 yards, but you never shot it beyond 300 yards because you didn't have access to a range.
That's right.
And so you go, I did this. I went to a competition and I swear I didn't hit anything beyond 500 yards. And I probably didn't. Now, strangely, I still ended up in the middle of the field, which worries the heck out of me, right? How did I do that? But if you get there and you're like, well, did I hit it? Because a lot of those courses of fire, you don't really find out what your scores were, on the individual stages per se. At least you didn't in the ye olden days. Mm-hmm. And so it would just be after the second day of the match, you'd kind of find out where you normally at the end of the day, you'd kind of have an inkling of where you were. But you didn't know specifically, did I hit all the targets at 900 yards? Did I hit all the targets at 700? And didn't know. And I swear the first match I went to, I didn't hit anything, like I said, beyond 500 yards.
Yeah. It plagues guys. And with hunting rifles and hunting season coming up this fall, if you don't go out and know this problem and fix it and correct for it, because you don't go out and shoot as much to find it.
That's right.
It's only the guys that go out putting in serious trigger time that finally realize that, hey, there's something wrong here.
Yep.
And so my goal here in this particular podcast is to tell you there is a big problem. You have to fix it. You have to know it exists. So the first thing in trying to solve it is just understanding that this is a problem, and most people don't know. Most people don't talk about it. Like, we still see blank stares when we tell people, hey, you have curvature of the bore, and right away they're thinking it's some type of weird personal infliction, right? But you're like, no, the rifling is actually bowed inside the barrel. And this isn't me making stuff up. I'm close friends with a lot of people in the industry that love to shoot, and we talk about this, but it's funny that they don't talk about it publicly.
Right.
Because there really isn't an answer for it yet. It's something you have to learn to fix old school.
So, I've been super lucky, right? Because I've always had really good rifles. Like when I decided to get into long range shooting, I didn't actually have a decent rifle to put my name to. So I bought a Remington 700 and sent it off to Greytan and had it breathed on by Greg Tannell.
Yeah.
And you can't ask for more than that. And then subsequently, you worked on my rifle, and I've never had any other gunsmith rifle in my possession. The only other rifle that I've shot on a regular basis was I used to have a Tikka 243 hunting rifle, but I only ever shot it out to 200 yards, and the thing was great out to 200 yards. I just found some off-the-shelf ammo that it liked.
But what barrel did you use?
Krieger.
That's right.
Yeah.
So just for...
I've only... Actually... My new rifle has an IBI on it, and that's the first barrel I've ever had that wasn't a Krieger.
Triple stress relieved, IBI, and very close attention to the curvature of the bore. But Krieger is one of the few that actually measure the curvature of the bore and has a cutoff. So they actually go in and calculate the curvature of the bore, and they have a plus or minus. So I'll bring Mike on and interview him again. If you go back to our older podcast, you'll see where we interviewed Mike from Krieger here, and they'll throw them away. They'll literally destroy the barrels if they don't make the grade. And that's part of the reason is they know that as shooters, this is an issue.
Right.
Even though most people wouldn't know how bad it is inside, it's hidden. So I got three things. I'm going to try to find a video that I don't know if I can say the name of the manufacturer without getting in trouble. They posted up a video of one of their tools in which they actually bend the barrels from the outside, straightening up the curvature of the bore.
I've seen that once.
And this is true. If you go and look at some of the older videos or look for some older pictures of Savage, there was a video show that went through. They have a machine that it turns, has these handles at the top, and they're rolling a barrel around looking through the barrel, and there's an employee there. And they actually had a video released where they were still showing the machine in use. Mm-hmm. And they're actually bending the barrel in the middle, straightening the inside, not the outside, the inside. So they're looking at the curvature of the bore, they're putting pressure on it, they're trying to straighten the curvature of the bore out. Everybody in the industry that has anything to do with it or that is knowledgeable knows this problem exists. Everybody tries crazy ways to fix it, but when they do stuff like that, not to go off on another deep hole because we're going to come back to this, but it puts stress in the barrel, or it can if it's not stress relieved afterwards.
So it's probably good for 1 or 2 rounds, and then it starts crawling all over the place, right?
Yeah.
You start having hits all over the place.
So they would have to stress relieve it, which I'm sure that they do. Yeah. Now, here's the other thing is we had a gentleman, the reason this podcast exists is last week, he's taking our online long-range shooting school, and he has a Tikka, which me and Richard both had Tikkas, and they're good rifles, right? Yep. But after 3 or 4 shots, he's walking and consistently up about 2.5 inches. And that's a lot at 100 yards. And he was like, "Hey, do you think I ought to replace the barrel? And what do you think it is?" And I'm thinking, well, it could be stress in the barrel.
New?
It is. New? Well, I guess he purchased it new, but
he should send it back because they have a 1 MOA guarantee.
Yeah. But then the first shots are going in there. He's hitting the dots on our drill, but as the barrel's warming up, it's walking. And so think at a match, like there's all these things that can play hell with you at distance, getting good dope. So at a match, he's shooting, his barrel's warming up, he starts shooting higher.
Yeah. Well, that's why I went the way I went, right? So I was what's that word? I can't even say it today. I was reading a lot about long range shooting, and I basically said I'm going to buy my way into this so I don't have to worry about the rifle.
That's right,
and that's what I did. I mean, it cost me an arm and a leg to get the equipment that I put together, but then whenever there was an issue with where the rounds were landing, it was nothing to do with the rifle. It was always to do with the driver.
And keep in mind, we're not filthy rich. Like, I remember, Richard, you had a Dodge Durango the first time I met you. Full-wheel drive.
140,000 miles on it, yeah.
So he put his money in his passion, and it wasn't like it was just like, wow, I'm going to put $50,000. That's no big deal. It's a big deal to everybody that's in this sport, right?
Well, I mean, I was like a young family and,
Yeah.
bills to pay and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and so it wasn't like it was an easy decision. It is a lot of money.
Right.
When you start putting
But, this is how I justify it to my wife, of course. 15 years later, I still have that rifle and barrel, and I can spin that barrel on that rifle anytime I want and shoot 308 again.
Yeah. And it still works.
And it still works.
And 308s live forever.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Before we continue on, I do want to say a quick thank you to our last sponsor. I want to say thank you to Krieger Barrels. Krieger is a maker of fine cut rifle barrels. By the way, one of the oldest in the industry, what they do, and we're going to talk about chrome moly and stainless on ultra-thin barrels. This is a huge one, and it's a big boo-boo area for guys that are building these big calibers now and come back and get you. So Krieger has been making cut rifle barrels for a really long time. Mr. John Krieger's retired. I think, in my mind, they make the best in the world at what they do. We use them here exclusively. They have a new program called KriegerDirect.com where you can log on and get a barrel in about 3 to 5 days, which isn't the case for us. I mean, when you order barrels now with Krieger, I remember their lead time 6 months, 9 months, 18 months, 12 months. But the new program allows you to get on there, get your barrel, and get it in your hands, which is awesome. And so if you want the best and you really do want a good quality barrel, where they talk about the curvature of the bore, this isn't a plug for them. It's just their regular sponsor of the show. Stop over to KriegerDirect.com and check out all the barrels that they offer today. All right, so this is going to be multiple podcasts. The whole point of this podcast here is to say that there is a big problem that's unspoken about when it comes to getting true working dope for your rifle. And it has to do, one is the curvature of the bore, right, that people don't know exist. The second part is the changing of the ballistic coefficient as a fingerprint on the bullet itself amongst different rifles, different barrels, different barrel manufacturers. And then, of course, when we get later on, we're going to talk about stress and all these other things, cutting the muzzle too thin, opening the muzzle up. There's lots of other things that can screw with everything, right, when it comes to building a great rifle. But get a chance, I'm going to try to find the Savage video. I don't want to get in trouble with them because I've known them forever. I actually shot and actually was a chance to spend time with the president of Savage Arms in Oregon. So when Ron Coburn.
We've both had great shooting Savage rifles along the way.
Oh, my God, yeah.
I had a 308, which I regret selling to one of my friends who now lives in Texas, but that was a great shooting rifle.
I have killed hundreds and hundreds of animals with Savages when I was a kid. And the horrible bolt lift, I mean, they cock on open. So, I mean, there's ways to fix that stuff. But, I mean, for what they are, they're great rifles. But they released a video of showing this machine that bends the curvature bore. There are barrel makers out there that actually pay people to bend the barrels to try to get that curve straight, some not stress relieving afterwards. And so you can't just assume as you're going out and buying a quote-unquote custom barrel, just like anything else, that you're buying quality. There's a lot of art. The reason we don't make barrels is because there's like 8 decades of actually making the perfect barrel sunk into people's heads, and I don't have 8 decades left to figure it out. I mean, there's an art and craft to making a world-class barrel.
We don't know what we don't know.
That's right. So we sent some rifles down to the FBI, and they're all Krieger barrels, and the rifles were hammers. They're going to release some data to us, and hopefully we'll get the publicized, because the data that we got back was just absolutely incredible. But they weren't shocked. I mean, our end of it, we increased the accuracy substantially. But when asked what barrels we use, Kriegers, and they were not stunned at all. They're like, well, that is the barrels. I mean, that's all. Right. If they had a personal choice, that's all they would use anyway. Yeah.
And obviously, we don't want to talk about this too much, but those were brand new rifles that Richard schlepped together. Mm-hmm. And I bore sighted. I think I bore sighted both of them and then put 20 rounds through them. Mm-hmm. So a brand new barrel, 20 rounds through it. Then I just ran, 6, 7 patches through it just to make sure it was clean when it turned up in somebody else's hands. Yep. And the one rifle,
just hammers.
Was a hammer, and I actually wrote that on the barrel.
Yeah, and we didn't cherry pick them, so we just pulled right off the shelf and put them together.
No, I just grabbed components off the shelf. You said go grab a barrel, go grab a receiver, and put it together, and that's exactly what I did.
Yep. And I'm hoping that we're going to be allowed to talk about the data, because the data that we got back, I mean, they were all stunned. We were really pleased. And the barrage of testing that they put the rifles through was incredible, because it wasn't like they just went out and shot 2 5-shot groups with it. They really put them through their paces, and it was just astounding. Like have professionals that have the equipment for testing that they have down there, by the way, which is probably in the hundreds of thousands, not millions. So it was pretty cool. But the Krieger barrels were chosen for that reason. I mean, it's just the stress relief, the curvature bore, all these things start to, if we can control some of it, we know we're going to have some curvature bore, but if we can at least minimize that in manufacturing, and we know we're not getting a really bad one, it helps buffer us. We still have a little bit of fixing to do with our dope, but it's not going to be crazy, Well,
I mean, we talk about a lot of things that we get into as being a system, right? Like if you're into hiking, you'll have a sleep system, and you'll have a, this system or whatever. And basically, because you're recognizing the interaction between the individual parts that make up, what it is you're trying to do. If we took, I'll just grab an example here that comes to mind. If I took a bat action, and I bought just a lesser quality barrel, I knew was lesser quality, and the difference between great and lesser quality is probably about $300 to $400.
Yeah,
it's not a huge amount. I know everything is relative, but it's not a huge amount of money in the grand scheme of you're probably going to keep the rifle for 15 years.
That's right.
Right, so it's not a huge amount of money. If I did that and I put that rifle together, I can expect a certain level of performance. But if I go top shelf, I bought a top shelf action from Bat, I buy a top shelf barrel from Krieger, I buy a top shelf trigger from Trigger Tech, I put it into a chassis, and then I bed it, and then I train myself to be as best as I can be. I think that slogan's coming back, by the way. So I think I saw that on Facebook, that be all you can be is coming back. Anyway, I think if you train it, then you can expect to get top shelf performance. Right. I mean, not every day, right? We're not all the best every single day. Human. But we can expect to get, great performance. And I think that, for most of my life, I would work pretty hard in the job that I had. And I think that when you get some playtime, You want it to be effective, not frustrating. And that's why it's worth spending a couple more bucks and getting the best technology. You know, it does cost a little bit more. Maybe you have to save a little bit more. Maybe you buy a Tikka and then next year you buy a better rifle or a better barrel or whatever.
And
but
why put yourself through it? Like, I know what, if you're going to go the route of custom and you're going to build a custom rifle, even if you select all the best components, they still have to be put together properly. So in the gunsmithing world, if you go out and buy all of the best components in the world and the guy does a shit job chambering it, or he doesn't know how to dial out curvature of the board and all these other things, you're degrading the quality of the rifle. So it's the collection of the very best parts and then put together in the very best way. And then you get a chance to go out and enjoy yourself. Like, take the frustration part out of it. Going to the range and leaving with more questions and answers and more frustration than you went with, that's not fun.
No, and it's expensive as well.
It is. And it'll drive you out of the industry. So the next podcast we're going to get into, we're going to start diving into how to address getting good working dope, the curvature of the board, its effect, some ways that we can mitigate it old school and get good working dope for a rifle old school, as well as using some of the newer apps and technology out there. But right out of the gate, make no mistake about it, if you want to hit targets, you've got to control that arc of the bullet, and curvature of the bore is going to play not nice with programs out there, and they don't give you all the tools necessary to fix that. So our goal over the next couple of podcasts is really to share with you as much as we can to get good working dope for your rifle. Just to wrap up the podcast here, I do want to say, if you enjoy the podcast, you don't mind sharing it, someone's in long range shooting, we really appreciate it. If you would like to leave us a comment, we really appreciate that as well. If you'd like to get into the Wolf Pack, you can support the show by going over to Patreon. It's $3 a month and join the podcast, support the show. We really appreciate that as well. And don't forget to our online long range shooting school with new videos being posted up every week. I believe now we have 38 instructional videos posted, with a lot more to come, sharing a lot of the insights of what we do. So thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time to join us here at the show. We really appreciate it. My name is Jamie Dotson, and you are listening to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.